Welcome to the Gladden Longevity Podcast with Dr. Jeffrey Gladden, where our passion is helping you to become an age hacker. On this show, we want to help you optimize your life, energy, longevity, health, and human performance with impactful and actionable information by answering 4 questions. How good can we be? How do we make 100 the new 30? How do we live well beyond 120? And how do we live young for a lifetime? I'm Steve Ryder, and Dr. Gladden, we just wrapped up with Dr. Mason Bresett. He is a naturopathic doctor in Ontario, Canada, and the chief science advisor at Real Mushrooms. And we were talking about medicinal mushrooms.
Yeah, we're talking about shrooms today. Yeah, great conversation with him, really kind of going into his utilization of mushrooms in his clinical practice. And I found it illuminating. I think if you're interested in mushrooms and you kind of want to know how should I apply mushrooms to my particular issue, you're going to learn some things here. I found it helpful. And then I think in the age hacker segment, we actually branched out into some other topics like psychedelics and some other things that he's also interested in. So I think you'll find it an enlightening conversation.
One of the key takeaways that I grabbed was how a blend of 5 to 6 different mushrooms can have exponential benefits. Mm-hmm. And that's really fitting for the Gladden Longevity anti-inflammatory shroom formula that you guys have come out with.
Yeah, he was very impressed with that, which was interesting to see, kind of an independent observer. But I think the idea is when you do mix some of these mushrooms together, just like mixing certain herbs together or other things together, you get a bigger effect than just using one alone because they kind of play off each other, if you will. So that was fun to hear and talk about.
And for listeners that are interested in the Gladden Longevity anti-inflammatory shroom formula, you can go to gladdenlongevityshop.com. And if you use the promo code podcast10, you'll get 10% off your order of not only the anti-inflammatory shroom formula, but everything that you could purchase at the Gladden Longevity shop.
Beautiful. Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Gladden Longevity Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jeffrey Gladden, and I'm here with Steve Ryder.
Dr.
Steve,
Gladden.
How's it going, buddy?
It's going good. It's going good. I'm enjoying the winter here in Colorado, getting out, doing lots of cross-country skiing.
Nice.
And thinking about buying a pair of snowshoes to get out and
they're the best.
Really get deep into the mountains.
Snowshoeing's the best. It's super fun. So I love that. You get away. It's so quiet. Same way with cross-country skiing. It's so quiet. It's just...
Yes. Yeah, the way the snow absorbs sound. Right? And there's no leaves in the air. And it's
the best. You feel like you're on a different planet.
I know.
It's like the psychic clutter just clears out. It's so nice.
Yeah.
So, and speaking of psychic clutter, we have with us today a guest that's going to talk to us about mushrooms, Mason Bresett. And Mason is a naturopathic physician in Ontario, Canada, where it's also very cold, and apparently he's probably doing some snowshoeing. But it's an interesting topic, mushrooms. We're fascinated by mushrooms on multiple fronts. So, Mason, welcome to the Gladden Longevity Podcast.
Thanks for having me. This is going to be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. The winter is here, and it's cold up here in Canada.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit, you're a naturopathic physician, but tell me a little bit how you got interested in mushrooms. Was it something that came up in your curriculum, or you were always fascinated by them, or you like to saute them, or what happened?
Yeah, so I was trained as a naturopathic physician in British Columbia. Now I'm a naturopathic doctor in Ontario, just based on slight guideline issues. But right. I got interested in learning about mushrooms when studying herbs, because naturally in naturopathic college, you get a lot of robust training in herbal medicine. And there was a few not even a few, but like one class on mushrooms. And I was like, hey, what about these? Like, these are super interesting. These are very, very diverse. You know, they're adaptogens, a lot of them. So we're learning about herbs. And then I got introduced to mushrooms through herbs as the introduction. And from there, I just started to do some more, research within my studies and, outside of school mostly, and became a little bit obsessed, to be honest, and just started to really dive into all the literature, historical use with mushrooms while also in naturopathic college in BC at the time, which is in Western Canada. And I just found they were really interesting that they hit a lot of targets, like you got
Mm-hmm.
some herbs that hit a few targets and other herbs that can also hit many clinical and recreational health kind of targets. But I was amazed at mushrooms, them being a food, them being a medicine as well. And kind of that synergy just got me really intrigued by their potential.
So it sounds like you're probably using mushrooms almost on a daily basis in your clinical practice. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, it's pretty fair to say that. With that being said, a lot of people come in and they're like, "You're the mushroom doctor, right?" And they expect to get a mushroom, and I'm just like, "Well, you actually don't get one today." So for
Oh,
some people, it's a little bit of a letdown, but
right.
yeah, every day
You should
close
keep them
to
there
it.
like suckers. When I was a 5-year-old and got a shot, they'd give me a sucker going out the door. You should hand them a mushroom going out the door.
Yeah, well, we got tons of mushroom art, and yeah, there's so many things to grab their eye. But I should get some little souvenirs for them. You're right,
Just so they don't feel like they're leaving empty-handed. Yeah.
totally. But yeah, using them, most days, there are days that I go by and they're not useful or they're not, part of the clinical work that I'm doing. But yeah, they're great because they can be used for more acute things, like infections, and then more preventative things as well. So that's really nice about their dual function there.
Mason, you mentioned their adaptogens. Dr. Gladden, you with Gladden Longevity have come out with a mushroom formula, and I've heard you say this a number of times. They're adaptogenic mushrooms. What,
Mhm.
gentlemen, this is for both of you. What are adaptogens adaptogenic?
I'm not going to steal Mason's thunder. Mason, jump in.
Please add on to whatever I say here, but there's different definitions of what this means, but to me, it's a food or a medicine that can basically help us adapt to the modern world. And in other literature, you'll see that, for some classification of being an adaptogen, it has to somehow work on the HPA axis or one of these axes that we're constantly talking about with our endocrine and hormone system that helps us buffer physiological and psychological stress. So in the most simplest terms is it's something that can help us adapt and respond to the demands that we're meeting physiologically in life.
Yeah, I think that's right. So HPA for the audience is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is kind of the stress axis, if you will, in the body between the brain and the adrenal glands,
That's a
mediated
mouthful.
through the pituitary. Yeah. When I think about adaptogens, too, one thing that I've always thought of them as a substance that will bring things back into equilibrium. So if something's too high, it will lower it. If something's too low, it will raise it. It tends to have this adaptogenic effect to bring things back into harmony or equilibrium, if you will. To Mason's point, ultimately that helps you handle stresses, right? Because if something's too high because of stress, it helps to bring it down, like ashwagandha can bring things down. And then if things are too low, it can bring it back up, right? So anyway, that's kind of how I think about it too. So you don't give mushrooms to everybody. Tell me who you wouldn't give a mushroom to.
I wouldn't give it to, somebody where there's no, basis, I guess, to lead their, clinical plan with that. But, stepping that back a little bit further again is most people can eat mushrooms in their diet. So, most people I do
Mm-hmm.
recommend, consuming them. So everybody does get them in that fashion, but I guess it was a little bit of a error there in my own talking about them. But I wouldn't give it to somebody that they don't really need it, where maybe they need some more lifestyle adjustments. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
they're coming in thinking a mushroom's going to solve all their problems, mental, emotional, physical,
Mm-hmm.
and that person just needs something else in the time. Maybe in the future they could use a more therapeutic dose of one of them, but most people they should be eating mushrooms, I think. But from a more targeted approach, some people just don't need them at that stage in their treatment plan. um,
So let me ask you this. What are some of the indications or conditions that you find mushrooms to be most helpful?
So just generally, there's a good basis to, you know, eat mushrooms if you're looking to support your general immune system based on some of the innate compounds that come naturally packaged in a mushroom.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of research in using mushrooms in integrative oncology. So those patients often, receive some mushrooms
Yeah.
somewhere along their plan. And then also those prone to burnout, with the adaptogen effects we were talking about, those prone to infections, cold and flu season, I usually seasonally prescribe some of these things too, as I'm sure some other practitioners do with certain compounds and herbs and diet.
So which ones are you talking about? Maybe you can rattle them off for the audience here so they get a feel for that. So let's say you're working on somebody's immune system. Which ones do you like?
I really like turkey tail, reishi for the immune system. I think those two have a big, robust resume that show that they can be helpful for the immune function. But what's interesting about mushrooms is that, all of them are beneficial for the immune system. It's like all of us kind of have like a face. And I compare mushrooms to that in a way, in the sense that, all of our faces are somewhat similar, but they're a little bit different. So most mushrooms do have immunogenic actions that we can use. But turkey tail, reishi are some big ones. Cordyceps.
So let me ask you this. So I can imagine people with depressed immune systems would benefit from this. What about people with overactive immune systems, like autoimmune disorders, or even things like Lyme disease, where they have an innate immune system that really is not shutting off properly, that kind of thing? Is it adaptogenic in that sense also, or what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I believe it all comes down to context, and I would say it's not an absolute contraindication with autoimmune conditions, and it might actually be useful. With mushrooms, they have the capacity to modulate the immune system, meaning sometimes the immune system will be in a hyperreactive state, sometimes it'll be in a sort of plummeted, non-functioning state. So mushrooms can kind of work differently with that scenario. There's a great study that kind of highlights this with one of the mushrooms, cordyceps. There's an isolated drug product made from it, and they give it to people from different categories of having an autoimmune disease, one being Graves', one being Hashimoto's. And similarly, those people would have those same two conditions in their life, some of them. But the mushroom therapy, or the drug-based mushroom therapy, showed that it had an equalizing effect on some of those metrics in the studies, which was really fascinating. So that immunomodulating action that we work with can be used in autoimmune conditions. But again, it's not about giving it to everybody, because some people might have a flare or reaction. Possibly that reaction could be a reactivation of the immune system, which is sometimes a good thing if it's been dormant. And then other times it might be just something that they're not quite ready for that. So you can use it in those conditions, those autoimmune conditions, but you have to be pretty specific on when, where, how much, how strong.
You mentioned, so immune boosting, and we talked about autoimmunity. What are some other conditions where you would reach for mushrooms?
Stress, insomnia, high performers looking to bolster stress and key performance in their sport or craft or trade. And we talked about the immune system, also looking at digestive health, because these have very unique fibers that interact with our microbiome. And also they have some of them have like a demulcent quality and a very nourishing quality in the very physical sense of how it goes into the body, like tremella. So you can use these for digestive concerns like dysbiosis, which is like that altered biome. And some of these mushrooms can be used for, more upper GI symptoms, as upper gastrointestinal symptoms as well. But those are some of the easy ones to kind of rhyme off there. And then, recurrent respiratory infections in people that have chronic lung disease. That's one that I use a lot of mushrooms with.
Okay, so let's talk about stress and performance. What mushrooms are you going for there? Is it cordyceps is one of them, or?
Yeah, for the stress and performance, cordyceps is one of them for like the physical energy and the mitochondrial effects with boosting energy and performance, and sometimes lung performance with VO2 max. And lion's mane, if you're looking for like more of that nootropic or ergogenic aid that may be a little bit more like psychological or brain focused. Reishi also has some good implications there for reducing overreaching, which is like a minor form of overtraining for athletes, just to bolster their whole kind of system, because these athletes train a lot. And those are the three that I use the most of in that context. So reishi, cordyceps, lion's mane.
Okay. Got it. And then what about psychologically? Is the lion's mane the primary thing you're using there, both for cognitive enhancement because it increases brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or is it something else that you're using?
Yeah, I think if you're looking at it from the cognitive aspect, looking at memory and overall brain function, lion's mane definitely takes the top place there.
Mm-hmm.
There's a compound in most mushrooms, but it's higher in certain mushrooms like golden oyster called ergothioneine. That one is also very implicative for neurological disorder and neurological health. Reishi has more of like a calming nature to it. So that could work well for somebody that has a little bit more of that fight or flight kind of stress response with their nervous system. And
right.
Yeah.
So ergothioneine is something that's used in longevity also. It has some beneficial effects on the cell in terms of some antioxidant properties, some other things that it does that we use it for longevity itself, if you will. So I'm curious about, you must be very meticulous about where you get your mushrooms, how they're grown, their nutrient concentrations, things like that. Tell us a little bit about that. How do you go about that?
Yeah, so there's different ways to grow mushrooms or fungal parts. And that's really important because that's sort of like comparing that to, if you're an omnivore or, you eat meat, that's like kind of looking at it like, what is your food eating? Or, where is the soil that your plants are growing on? It's an important thing to consider. And because mushrooms are wood degrading organisms, they like to take some of the lignin and all the compounds that are found in wood mostly and transform those into bioactive compounds. So I always like to look at the fungal part that's used. So I like to look at, what does the research say? What does tradition say? What does history say about what part to use? And that becomes different based on what you're trying to use it for. So for the mushroom, I'm mostly using the mushrooms in practice, but there are some times when some of those other fungal parts do become important. But you want to I like to see mushrooms that are grown on wood so that they have the active substrate and nutrition to, feed themselves and take in that fuel to then make all the active and the secondary compounds that are these therapeutic and medicinal properties that we've been talking about.
This episode of the Gladden Longevity Podcast is brought to you by the new Gladden Longevity anti-inflammatory shroom formula.
A little background, our anti-inflammatory formula is a potent blend of adaptogenic mushrooms specifically designed to support your body's natural defense mechanisms to reduce inflammation. This unique formula contains a powerful mix of medicinal mushrooms, including agaricus, reishi, cordyceps, and maitake, known for their immune boosting and anti-inflammatory properties. Together, they do a great job of turning down a major driver of inflammation.
I've been a big fan of adaptogenic mushrooms for a number of years now, and I was really excited to find you all were coming out with this. This is a superior product to what I've tested on the market.
Yeah, we love it, and our clients love it as well. Again, this is a tincture, so we will put it in tea, we'll put it in a smoothie, we'll put it in water and drink it. But to know that you're actually able to decrease NF-kappa beta, which is a major driver of inflammation in your body with this, it just goes along with everything else that we know about aging, that inflammation is a key driver of the aging process. So we love going straight at the heart of it with this formula.
Get 10% off your order of the new Gladden Longevity anti-inflammatory shroom formula when you use the code podcast10 at gladdenlongevitysshop.com. That's podcast10 at checkout when you visit gladdenlongevitysshop.com.
Experience the power of adaptogenic mushrooms with our anti-inflammatory formula and embrace a healthier, more balanced lifestyle. So what percentage of commercially available mushrooms do you think are actually grown on wood? I usually think of mushrooms as being in these dark, damp places, but I don't know if there's any wood in there. It almost looks kind of like dark soil. I haven't been in many of them, but is it common for mushrooms to be grown on wood?
In North America, no. It has to come down to scalability and economics. In Asia, specifically China, where they grow, I believe, 80% of the world's mushrooms. I could be off on that just a little bit. But that's where you'll find more of the mushrooms that are grown on wood, just based on the historical context and economics of growing mushrooms. There are, mushrooms that are grown on wood anywhere in the world, obviously. Like in nature,
Sure.
you'll see that. In different grow operations and cultivation operations, you'll see that. But it is less common in the US from what I've seen, because they choose to use something called myceliated grain, which is where you can grow a mushroom spawn on grains. And then through that process, you can create a product, but that product it leaves the final grain substrate in with the final product. So you're getting some myceliated grain, or MOG, they call it, mycelium on grain. And that's a whole different product than a mushroom. So, and then there's another kind of third.
Is it a good product, a bad product? I mean, is that a bad thing to consume or a good thing to consume, or you're just being duped into thinking you're getting mushroom when you're not?
Yeah, it's more of a labeling problem that misinforms consumers. And I'm sure there is some minor, therapeutic benefit to the tiny amount of, mycelium in there with the grain. But overall, you're getting less bioactive compounds that have been, most researched in the world. And that's an issue, I think, from a labeling and transparency perspective. So, and then also we're not going into the health and, medicinal properties of that, but most of the studies are done on either pure mycelium, which is different from that myceliated grain, or just a mushroom with all these traditional and epidemiological studies we have. They're just using the mushroom that you'd find at the superstore or outside if you're a forager knowing what you're doing.
Got it. Okay. I assume that you're using mushrooms in your own health. Is that correct?
Yeah. At our house, we're putting them in most things. I like to cook with them, but, we've got a busy lifestyle like a lot of folks. So, we try to add them into things, add them into smoothies, add them into different rice or grain bowls. We try to, use the extracts in an elixir, which is like a coffee blended with some fat, or a tea blended with some fat and other superfoods. So yeah, I try to get in a lot of mushrooms in the diet, just based on, my own personal connection to them, and obviously the science and the tradition behind them.
So what kind of mushrooms are you eating? Are you eating like the little, we go into the store and there's like a lot of different mushrooms in there, right? So you think of those little white capped mushrooms, and they even can those things. And then there's, a whole range of mushrooms. How would you advise somebody going into a store? What should they be getting?
They should try to get a diverse selection if they can, like if you're somebody that just eats the white buttons all the time, maybe branch out and try the enokis or the shiitakes if they have them. There's a lot of small growers popping up at different markets these days. So, you can find lion's mane sometimes in some of these city centers. You can find beautiful oyster mushrooms that have a ton of medicinal benefits. So, we eat a lot of shiitake at our place. That's just because I grow those where I'm at, and they grow pretty good here. So we dry those up. We put them in soups. But yeah, we go to a guy at the market. Joe is his name, and he's got beautiful different oysters and lion's mane, actually. So that's a nice treat when we can get there. But for somebody just going in, try to get some diversity. Try the white buttons, but they all have some therapeutic and health benefits. So you don't have to be too picky, but I would just say mix it up a bit.
Nice.
And then, you can get that updated or not updated, the extracted form of them, what makes it a little bit easier to be shelf stable, that takes out all the water content of them. Because mushrooms are 90% water. So when you cook them down, they go down to basically nothing. So the extracts are nice because they just remove that process. They kind of break down that hard mushroom cell wall, that you can just add those into simple things if you're not totally into the mushroom flavor or consistency. Because some people are very, avoid that slimy kind of texture.
Gotcha. I've seen and tried mushroom coffees and mushroom hot chocolates and things like that. What's your take on those? Are those kind of just consumer marketing, or is there a real value in those products too? What is your thought on that?
Yeah, probably a bit of both. I think it comes down to, the dose and why you're using it. Again, looking at the part of the fungus that's used in that product would be important. But yeah, I think, any little bits of mushrooms that people can get in, even if that's just like a gateway into mushrooms, if they're having that in a hot chocolate or it's in a little chocolate that they can eat, that's great. But I guess if you're trying to use it for more health purposes, sometimes that dose has to be escalated. But even those little, micro small amounts will have, an impact. And it's a great way for people to start to experience the benefit of mushrooms paired with a great, very rich and also healthful chocolate that everybody loves. So
Sure.
yeah, I think they're good, but just look at the dose, look at how it's made, maybe try to get, not a lot of sweeteners that some of these things come in with that can, kind of get you back to the starting point there when looking at your health.
Yeah. I see in a lot of those products, there's a blend of mushrooms that go into them, which is probably a nice thing because then people don't have to select one or another. They can kind of get a sort of a natural blend. Are there blends that are put together that are outside of a product like coffee or hot chocolate that people can get? And do you recommend those?
Yeah, those are great products within, reason. I think, some of them are getting up to like the 10, 11, I got the 20 blend mushroom, and you're basically just getting a very like micro amount of each one. So I would say like, I personally like the ones around 5 to 6 mushrooms. 5 is kind of the sweet spot. And that allows you to get, a nice blend, a nice spectrum of those 5 mushrooms that can really, they're all working on, similar things, but they all kind of have their own personality, like I was saying, and they can help people just get a real good taste. And some of the mushrooms are more bitter, so you can, pair a bitter mushroom with a more friendly tasting one in some of these blends, which is helpful. So from a taste perspective, it can help that way. And yeah, you can get that robust kind of synergistic effect. The whole synergy thing hasn't really caught on yet, but I think we'll find out more with future studies and anecdotal things on how these things are mixing together.
Okay, so I believe you work with a company, Real Mushrooms. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, I'm the chief science advisor at Real Mushrooms, which is an organic mushroom extract company.
Okay. So how'd you get involved with them? Did they reach out to you because of your experience and expertise?
So if we circle back to when I was in British Columbia going through school, I worked for a herb company where I educated people on how to use herbs safely, how to use them in different aspects of their life, mostly tinctures and alcohol extracts of plants. And that's when I became interested in mushrooms. And I actually saw that there was a big gap in the quality and transparency of the products on the market even then. So I had contacted the owner, which I didn't know at that time, of Real Mushrooms, and said, hey, do you want to come to the school and give a talk to some of these students that are curious about mushrooms and wanting to learn more? And he just blew our minds about like the ins and outs of the industry, that, he's just a genius when it comes to these sort of things compared to the, science and health, which was kind of our realm. But when he told us about, how these things are grown, what you want to look for, talking about active compounds, it was just like, wow. And then we had stayed in touch after that. And then I started to, help him out with some of the back end science stuff and traditional uses of mushrooms. And the rest was history there.
Nice. Yeah. So it looks like they do quite a few extracts, which is kind of what you were talking about, which makes it kind of friendly for people if they want to get some of the health benefits of it. When you come across a condition and you put somebody on mushrooms, is it kind of like a course of therapy, or is it something that you continue kind of in perpetuity, or what is how does it work for you typically?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when I think about my cases, it's a little bit dependent, obviously, but looking at, shorter acute syndrome, somebody might be on a mushroom for say 2 to 6 weeks at a higher dose. And then we might drop them down to more of like a maintenance level to either, help their immune function out, help their digestive system out. So I would say, the average would be like weeks to months for like treating, something a little bit more emergent. And then if somebody does have, a chronic infection or a chronic disease, I might use them long-term, months to years with some breaks in between, just to give the body a little bit of a time to have a break.
Okay, good. Steve, anything come to mind as you hear about this?
No, this is really timely, I think, because I've been thinking about taking my closet here, getting it cleaned out, and setting up some places that I can, some little mushroom grow houses for some stuff like oyster mushrooms and others that are easily grown here at the house. Because as I have been starting to move out from just the traditional white button mushrooms to trying shiitake and trying these other mushrooms that I can get at the grocery store, I'm really enjoying cooking with them. And so I've been thinking about, okay, what else can I cook with and use in my regular diet that I can just grow right here in my closet? And
the closet diet.
Yeah, the closet diet. So the closet mushroom. So get some wood chips. It sounds like you're going to need some wood chips in there.
Yeah, you'll need some good growing substrate for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're so tasty. Like I even throw them in my French onion soup, just throw in like some shiitakes with all those onions. It's just like a super meal with like a lot of nutrients and very, very, very beneficial.
Yeah, if they're kind of either chopped up or ground up or they're small, I don't know the name of the long, thin mushroom, but it has a little tiny cap on it. Throwing those in anything, even on a sandwich or in an omelet, or you can throw them literally in anything. Smoothie, doesn't matter. Soup, stew, so easy to consume them.
Yeah, easy to consume.
Yeah, cool. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show. I think it's interesting for the people to understand there's a systematic approach to using them, but if people want to use them for general health, I think getting a nice blend of these mushrooms, maybe 5 of them, as you say, 5 or 6, and utilizing them. We've developed a shroom formula that we put together. It's a tincture, alcohol extracted tincture with 5 mushrooms. Most of the ones you're talking about that the research had shown basically modulated NF-kappa beta. So it had the ability to kind of turn down inflammation. And we find in the aging process, inflammation is such a big driver that we put that together. And then we just put the tincture into a tea or water or something like that. And it seems to be good. We also have an immune one that we use. That's a tincture also that's got predominantly turkey tail in it. And, it seems to be helpful for people too. But so we like mushrooms. It's good stuff.
Yeah, I saw that on your site there, and I listened to a couple podcasts that you were mentioning them. So yeah, that's going to be helpful for that inflammatory process that so many people aging are going through. So yeah, that looked great.
Yeah, nice. Cool. Well, thanks for being on the show. We appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Mason. Stick around for the Age Hackers Plus segment.
You bet.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Gladden Longevity Podcast. If you would like more information on what we've discussed or other topics, please reference the show notes or go to gladdenlongevitypodcast.com. You can also find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter by searching Gladden Longevity. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to get future episodes delivered to you and share our podcast or this episode with someone in your life that you may find benefit. Thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another exciting episode. The Gladden Longevity Podcast is provided for informational purposes only. It does not constitute medical advice. This content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of a physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. The use of any information and materials linked to this podcast is at the listener's own risk.